7th, 2023 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm, East Coast Executives. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. You know what? I see people checked in from Cincinnati, Delaware. I see they're checking in. I love it. Please continue to let us know where you're from. The Digital Career Success Series, DCSS, is a professional development series that helps members of our Urban League Young Professional chapters and other diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers through digital platforms such as webinars, Facebook, and Instagram Live. The goal is to provide an opportunity for professional development right from one's computer. If you want more information, visit nuljobsnetwork.com. Speaking of more information, today's Digital Career Success Series, For the Culture, features Dr. Dante Vaughn, author of the book From Culture to Culture, the system to define, implement, measure, improve your company's culture. Dr. Dante Vaughn, let's do it, man. How's it going?
It's going great, Kenneth. How are you?
I'm exceptional today, man. Really excited to have you here on the platform speaking on this topic. If I remember correctly, I think Dory Brown from the NUL team had shared with me that this is the first time on the Digital Career Success Series platform that we've touched on corporate culture and just employee culture in general. So you're setting the trend right now.
Awesome. I like to be a trendsetter.
Well, look, speaking of things you'd like to be, let's just let the audience know a little more about Dr. Dante Vaughn, please.
Sure. So I serve as the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Partner of a company called CultureWorks. We actually just navigated an acquisition, which was an exciting process. And we're really just grounded in helping people lead better together. That's sort of our motto. And really what that means for us is helping leaders navigate what it means to show up effectively as a leader in their lives, personally and professionally. And then how does that then translate to the workplace and the experiences that they are able to perpetuate by way of their leadership. So all things from executive coaching to leadership development, ongoing sort of continuous improvement efforts, even down to how they operate within that business, all impacts workplace culture, which we'll get into. But I'm a Philly native, as you know, Ken.
Yes.
Born and raised, proud of it. I reside outside of Atlanta now, where we operate our business, and you know, I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you all.
Philly native, Drexel educated. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Look, hey man, we're excited to have you, as I mentioned. And you know, I was looking at some information online about, you know, some of the work you do, about the book, and just kind of your thoughts on culture. So I can't wait to jump into this because I have so many questions, and I know you're going to provide some real gems for people on the corporate side, how they're delivering their culture, and also the employee side and what their responsibilities are to it. So let's go to the first, let's just talk about it. Next slide, please. All right, so this is something that I get asked often as a recruitment and talent acquisition professional. I even quit asking the question of my employee partners because I think sometimes the employees have a better understanding. But what is workplace culture?
You know, it's so funny that this seems such a difficult thing to define, right? And that's part of the work that we do. But the way we define workplace culture, and I wrote this in the book, simply put, the values we share, the language we use, the behaviors we display, the connections we make. If you want to simplify culture, that's how we define it. Values, language, behavior, connections. And we think about culture, and that's in the context of, from a social point of view, inside and outside the workplace. So in that context, and how does an organization wrap their hands around the values we share, the language we use, the behaviors we display, and the connections we make? That's what it comes down to.
All kind of internally. And now, is there a piece of that, if I'm working in an organization, like sometimes I think that people, they ask that question independently, kind of outside of what they're going to bring to the culture? Like, can you, do you understand what I'm saying? Can you speak a little bit?
Yeah, I firmly believe an organization's culture rests, or the responsibility to foster that culture rests with leaders, right? Because they set the tone, they set the pace. With that being said, those experiences that are realized in those interactions, how leaders engage, how they interact, how they make decisions in the business every day, that's what generates this experience. So a lot of people coming from the outside in wants to understand what will my experience look like, or what will I encounter? What can I anticipate? Because that for them is, I guess, encapsulated by this word or this definition that we call workplace culture.
So you decided to write the book about corporate culture. Can you kind of walk me through your thought process on that? Like, hey, you know what? I need to deliver this at mass, at scale, to individuals to help them improve.
And much of the work that my business partner, we co-authored the book together, Randall Powers, our experience as organizational leaders, but also operational consultants, gave us a lot of visibility to some gaps in businesses. And what we found was, I don't care how you try to improve systems and processes within a business, unless you address leadership behavior, leadership skill and competency, then you're never going to realize the full potential. And when you start to peel back the onion of leadership behavior, you start to understand that most companies don't know how to truly, with proactive intentionality, shape how leaders engage, interact, and make decisions in the business. And when they talk about this concept of corporate culture or workplace culture, they treat it like it's abstract, intangible, fluffy kind of thing in the business, when in fact, it should be treated like a strategic pillar in the business. So that we recognize, hey, how do we educate the marketplace on, one, this is a strategic pillar of your business. It impacts every aspect of how you fulfill your purpose, vision, mission, strategy, but also you need a system. You need a way to approach it operationally, similar to how you would approach other functions in your business. You want a business leader to take it serious. Well, you can't manage what you can't measure. So how do we start to put a system around it? And that's what really led to me building on this, what we call culture performance management methodology, so that it's something tangible that a company can say, oh, I actually can truly impact workplace culture proactively. I'm not talking about employee surveys, pool parties, and donut drives, right? There's a place for that. But what we're talking about is getting at the heart of workplace culture, which now you got to get all the way to behavior. And that's where I come in on the people science side.
Okay. Wow. I can appreciate that and what you're saying, kind of the top down piece, because and just it being a real pillar of an organization. Because look, if you're looking at talent acquisition, kind of what your culture's doing is impacting that, right? Talent retention. And then if you're looking at, how you're showing up with your consumers and your value proposition in that place, all of it's showing up there.
Absolutely. And we're in the marketplace now where, with the demographic shift, right? We talked about this before. Over 55% of the working population in the United States is of a millennial or younger generation. The expectation for that experience matters, right? And you can no longer, and I talk about this in the book, you can't fake culture. You can pretend like it's the best thing since sliced bread. You can put it all over your website. These are our core values. Here's our purpose, vision, mission. But the reality is, the experience is what speaks to that culture. And we're in a society where that experience will be shared, right? I mean, through Glassdoor, through social media, and is indicative of your turnover and your attrition and the things that happen in your business. So organizations have to get their hands around that.
Man, let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, so I hear a lot of people talk about culture fit, you know, and on both sides of that, right? So the people that are bringing talent in, you know, they weren't a good culture fit. They weren't a good fit. And then the people that are looking at organizations saying, you know, I'm not sure that's a good fit for me. But to your point, I think they're grabbing some of this information, especially people coming in from Glassdoor, from other sites like that, from just kind of glancing through the website and looking at the About Us page, right? And they're looking at cultural fit, maybe through a racial lens, right? But I think you in your book, there's a deeper dive for you.
Oh, absolutely, Ken. I mean, so when I hear, we could probably do a whole different session on culture fit. A couple things come to mind. First is, I think you're spot on. Culture expands beyond just our ethnic, racial, demographic centric conversation of culture. Now, part of that is perpetuated by companies, right? As soon as they say culture, then they think DEI, they think these other strategies within an organization is what makes that up. Part of the challenge in that is the real experience that you have in the workplace is grounded in the connections you make with individuals each and every day in the midst of the business. It's not just impacted by broader kind of schematic things. It's impacted by how when I pop into work in the morning, how I'm engaged by Ken and how I engaged Ken and how that made me feel and how that drove outcomes in my performance. So to get at that, if I'm a candidate coming into an organization, I want to, if that recruiter or interviewing manager can't articulate either their core values that everyone stands on, that grounds their interactions and decision making, if they can at least speak to their own personalized experiences and the journey that they've navigated, those are red flags for me, because that means it's marketing, it's window dressing, but it's not ingrained in a real experience. They should be able to speak to it and say, hey, you can expect this. And the dynamic between our employees and our leaders are X. And you're going to navigate your onboarding experience in a manner that will foster growth, not just in mechanical or contextual understanding of system or process, but experientially. Like if an organization can't speak to that succinctly, there's a gap there. And I want to know how do those core values, how do I expect my experience to be aligns with what that individual tells me. So I can buffer that also against what I can research and what's indicative. If an organization claims that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is a priority to them, and then I go to their website, I see a little button that may speak to something around diversity, but then I look at the company-wide pictures and I don't see representation in a leadership level, or I don't see that there are efforts to drive representation at various levels in an organization. If I don't see an interest in outreaching within the community to drive inclusion in other areas of their business, there are a lot of indicators that can help you validate, is this window dressing or not? So I think as a candidate coming in, they got to start to ask those questions. And on the employer side, articulating those core values as part of the interview process, integrating it into the job descriptions to say, hey, if this profile of individual from a core value standpoint aligns with you, you're probably going to be a good fit here. If it doesn't, then that's okay as well, but you just may not be a good fit here. The problem is we have leaders who use the excuse of not a culture fit because they've dropped the ball and how effective they were as a leader, not necessarily because the individual wasn't a good culture fit. But you're going to send me down a rabbit hole.
Man, listen, I like where you're headed here, but I wanted to speak about this. You spoke about onboarding. And so if we talk about the process and know what, so here's where I'm headed. I'm just going to kind of phrase this to tell you where I want to go, because you were talking about the great resignation myth and some stuff I was watching. And I thought it was amazing what you were talking about. Like, oh, wow, we got to talk about this on the DCSS. But if someone's coming into an organization and, they're going through their interview process, they're hired, they're onboarded, but in that interview process, what type of questions should they be asking to give them information about culture?
From the candidate's perspective
From
or
the candidate perspective, from the candidate perspective, yes.
from a candidate's perspective, kind of piggybacking off of what I said earlier, I as a candidate, first, let me pause. A lot of times as candidates, we have to shift our mindset to what our role really is in the process. Because oftentimes, especially if we are seeking employment in a state of urgency and in some desperation, your mindset becomes very transactional and it becomes about proving oneself that they are viable. I'm trying to prove all my skills and experience because I got to prove myself that I'm worth employment. Let's pause for a second. You got to believe in your value before you ever get to the interview. You have to believe in your strengths before you ever get to the interview. You have to believe you're an asset before you ever get to the interview, because that's going to shape how you approach your line of questioning. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. We got Dr. Dante Vaughn on the Digital Career Success Series. Please drop your questions in the Q&A. We will have a Q&A segment probably at about 12:40, but in the meantime, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so we're talking about growth in the workplace. What does growth look like in the workplace? Really interesting question. I'd like to hear you speak of it on both sides of the equation, right? Employer and employee, kind of what does growth look like? What are people looking for? Like, what are they measuring to get that kind of metric?
You know, what I find is I run into a number of leaders or up and coming leaders whom I coach, and they often narrow their perspective on growth by way of title, position, compensation. The challenge with that, of course, is an organization's infrastructure may not support your trajectory exactly, right, in terms of title, position, or what have you. So you have to start to balance your desire to progress in title and position with what are the skills, competencies, abilities you're looking to nurture in that employment opportunity. Statistically, the average millennial or younger employee does not intend to stay with that employer longer than 5 years unless they experience personal and professional growth and feel purpose driven. Well, to know that I'm experiencing that and can be proactive in ensuring I nurture that for myself as an employee and not waiting for my employer to do that, then I need to make sure I'm clear about, well, what is it that I want to nurture? And sometimes that comes down to even having and exchanging in some confident dialogue with your direct reporting manager around, hey, I believe I need to nurture these skills because I see myself in a director role, whether it's your role or in another company, I'm headed toward director. So to do that, there are some skills and competencies that I know I want to nurture. Here's where I think I have opportunity. Where is it that you see me to have opportunity? And let's put a plan together. Again, whether I'm here or somewhere else, I'm going to seize the opportunity for the investment of my time in that employer. So understanding those specific skills and competencies becomes important, because then I always say you celebrate the buoys. The bigger buoy may be or the shoreline may be title, position, compensation, but in the meantime, I can measure other nuances, such as, oh, now I know how to project manage and I didn't know how to project manage before. Now I know how to navigate fiscal, oversight, and I didn't know how before. Those subtleties become the measure of growth. From an employer's perspective, it's more about connecting broader strategic objective with then how are the individuals within my organization positioned to help me achieve that goal. So the lens should still always be, what are those shorter interval objectives that help me on the trajectory for where I want to be, instead of just measuring the end outcome, because that can be a really daunting and even frustrating thing to do.
So we're talking about professional development on one end, and then consistent check-ins and feedback on the other side, right? Am I hearing that correct?
You bet. And not waiting for your employer to approach you to promote or foster that? Because oftentimes that's where a lot of resentment and frustration is born out of. I'm waiting for my supervisor to nurture that. Well, we have to take some ownership in that development ourselves as well.
Man, this is leading me to a question, and I don't think it's on the slides or anything, so I apologize for this. But what type of feedback are you getting? Like, I know you're out and about and you're doing workshops and you're helping organizations get better at culture, right?
Mhm.
What's the feedback you're receiving? Like, when people come to you, what are they looking for? And then what feedback are you getting after you come and sprinkle your magic dust on it and provide real concrete guidelines on how they need to move forward?
Typically, I mean, what I'm finding, if you hear a Tyler in the background, it's my son. I apologize. Um, uh, Typically, I'm encountering a multifaceted organizational culture that's facing different challenges, commonly breakdowns in trust, communication, thus impacting effective decision making or driving ineffective decision making. So we often have to navigate where the breakdowns in trust are born, both due to inconsistency in system and process, but also by way of how people are actually making connection, how they are aligning and effectively navigating relationships within the business. So we deal a lot in organizational toxicities and challenges that are born out of family-owned and operated businesses who then have grown but haven't scaled infrastructurally or in how they actually in their dynamics as part of a team. So we work with that a lot. And then the breakdowns in communication are often born out of more of a systematic breakdown, right? They don't have the right channels of escalation. People don't know from a role, accountability, responsibility point of view, what do I own, right? For fear of accountability. So we start to navigate those things in the communication side. And then when we talk about some other areas of their business, right? Really integrating a cultural performance management system in their business is essential, because otherwise it becomes window dressing. So how do I integrate my values, my behavioral standards and expectations into day-to-day practice? How I show up from the time I greet a person when they walk in the door to how I communicate at my operations meeting, how I navigate actions and decision-making. All of those factors influence employee and leader experience. So we're navigating all of those things.
And that's great information. Just to kind of give a preview, on the 21st of this month, we're doing networking at work. And I think we'll be able to piggyback on some of the things you're speaking about right there. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So this is something that, man, we hear about more and more. It's like it's at an all-time high, just talking about workplace biases. And I'm sure you have your thoughts on kind of how this shows up and kind of where it comes from. We have a really interesting question in the Q&A that we'll get to, but I think it will align well with kind of how you're going to deliver and address this question. So what's been your experiences? What are you hearing from both sides?
From a bias point of view, right? I see that both, and of course, commonality in racial bias, but also in generational biases, right? Especially as we see this integration of baby boomer to Gen X to millennial to Gen Z, this cross section of generational workers have really highlighted the biases that exist among all of those demographic groups. So with that in mind, I think oftentimes it requires a lot of self-reflection, because these things are born out of our childhood experiences, our standards of upbringing, our personal cultures that we navigate in the workplace. I apologize. My son is give me a second, son. This is the reality, folks, that we face.
Don't need to apologize for being a great dad, man. We appreciate your son joining us today.
Thanks. So I think with that in mind, the biases start with self, right? Because an examination of biases solely from an organizational view is one that is very short-sighted, because we need to ensure that we address it personally. But with that, from an organizational point of view, hold on, son, relax, son. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second, guys. I apologize.
It's the Digital Career Success Series, the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. We are here today with Dr. Dante Vaughn and little Dr. Dante Vaughn as well, talking about For the Culture. So we're excited to have Dr. Vaughn. He's written the book, From Culture to Culture, and he's based out of Atlanta, Georgia, but he's here today with us speaking about culture. Let's do it.
I think from an internal workplace point of view, I think it's very important also to examine the accountability structures that we put in place as an employer, because oftentimes we don't hold individuals accountable for when they exhibit conscious or subconscious bias within the workplace. And oftentimes the higher the performer, the more inclined that we are to ignore or turn a blind eye to those scenarios. His mother's walking in, so that's a good thing. So I think what I find in organizations is when we have this bias conversation, it only centers around, oh, let's do some training once a year, and that's enough. You have to put infrastructure in place to address and have consequences for when biases are exhibited, or a investigatory process for when biases are reported. And a lot of times organizations miss those steps. They simply leave it to the individual to somehow shift their personal biases to impact the organization. That in and of itself is something that is not as effective as ensuring that you have repeatable processes and systems in a business that says, we don't tolerate bias. Here's the track that we follow to ensure that anytime these biases are exhibited, that we take action around them, anytime that they're reported, and that individuals within our organization have psychological safety and have an outlet to share when they believe that these biases exist, because sometimes it's just a breakdown in communication that presents itself as bias simply because of the disconnect. So being able to navigate these things in an intentional way, similar to how we treat workplace harassment and other avenues, bias can be treated in a similar manner. We just have to do it with intentionality.
You bring up some really great points, because I haven't really gave much thought to, all right, so someone's experiencing what they believe to be workplace bias, right? And then they have to have a place to take that to relieve themselves of it, right? I need to take this somewhere, but then it needs to be addressed effectively, and there should be a system on how that happens. And I just never thought about that back end piece, like, are the leaders or the managers within the organization, are they consistently being reinforced in their abilities to address those types of complaints, right? It's similar to how they would have I guess a step-by-step process to workplace harassment, right? So how about workplace bias? So I get what you're saying. That's amazing. Yeah, I never looked at it from that perspective, but there needs to be a system and a standard.
You bet, because if we rely solely on each individual's ability to assess their own personal or subconscious bias and act on those accordingly, well, there's a lot of uncertainty in that and inconsistency in that. However, if you set your standard as an organization and build system and process around that, drive ownership and accountability around that, then that's something you can actually wrap your hands around it and validate to the organization that you care enough about it.
Definitely. Let's go to the next question, please. I'm sorry, the next slide. You know what? But before we go there, this question is it's sitting in the chat. It's sitting in the Q&A, and I didn't want to not address it. And I think this might be a good time to speak about it. So the question is, Western standards of professionalism are often heavily defined by white supremacy or Eurocentric norms. How does a Black organization take steps to deconstruct and redefine what that looks like in the 21st century for the future workplace. But I want to add this part on it. A lot of workplaces are becoming hybrid or remote. So how are we working with that?
It's a great question. So I always believe let's start an organization starting all the way back to purpose. And what I mean by purpose, why do you exist? Why do you show up every day? Why have you sought out other individuals to come together? All right, what is your purpose for existence? And with that purpose, you have a clear vision. What do you envision as the final impact outcome you want? And then what are the steps you're going to take? What's the mission critical things necessary functionally in delivery or service, product, whatever it is? And then there's some strategy. So if I'm clear about my purpose, I'm clear about my vision, I'm clear about my mission, then I believe I know what's required to get me there and how we engage, how we interact, how we make decisions, how we show up to the marketplace. And if I'm clear about what's required, hence a value system, then the norms of other organizations, institutions, geographically or otherwise, will not circumvent or supersede what you believe is necessary to thrive in fulfillment of your purpose. I always tell an organization, put your purpose, put your values ahead, because that becomes the driver behind all of your decision making. And if there are organizations who don't align with your representation of the African diaspora or whatever it is, then they're not a good fit, right? And a lot of times we shy away from our own purpose, our own belief systems as an organization, simply because we're trying to attract or retain business. We have to decide what's important. If I define upfront, if we show up this way, it is what will enable us to achieve our purpose, then I'm going to be hard pressed to divert from that. Now, I don't mean to suggest that we don't evolve and transform as organizations and respond to the market need. What I'm suggesting is, however, foundationally, when we have to feel like we're battling within the social or socioeconomic norms that have been pressed upon us, especially as Black owned and operated businesses, not to the extent that I have to divert from my core purpose, my core vision, my core mission, my core values.
So it's kind of like, you be true to yourself. And while you're
be true to yourself, because you're always, when you lean, and I believe this personally, for each human, each individual, if you lean into as close to what you believe your purpose is, then the way, the doors, the windows, the obstacles to overcome, those things become a lot clearer for you. As long as you remain true to that, true to where your spirit's driving you, true to your purpose, then you don't have to be shifted significantly by way of other factors that are going to tell you you need to be doing something else, representing yourself in a different way, or what have you, right? So that comes down to how close are you in alignment with, and clear about what your real purpose is. And I believe that applies personally and as a business leader.
So as we show up to these organizations, and I think to your point earlier, sometimes we arrive out of necessity. We need this job, or we need more money, and they're offering it over here. I really don't even necessarily care about what the culture looks like, but I took this job and now I'm here. And now I care about what the culture's like, right? So we're there. What's our responsibility to influence and to maybe make adjustments and change? Or do we have one at all? As a line employee or leader, not leading the organization, but maybe leading your line of the business.
Sure. I think as a leader in any context, if you believe you are a leadership is not a switch you turn off. If you believe you're a leader, you have a leader mindset. That means you believe that you can be a change agent. You can influence another individual's direction, development, approach, a leader believes they have that power. They have a power to move another individual from point A to point B, or move a team or move a group from point A to point B. What makes us leaders is the people. We manage system, process, resources. We lead people. So if we're leaders and we believe we're leaders, and when we show up in an organization, I don't care what my title is, I'm a leader. So I'm gonna show up in a way that's indicative of what I'm inclined to be or want to be. So if I believe I'm a change agent, if I believe I'm a motivator, then I'm gonna look and identify those opportunities to show up in that way. Whether I'm on the front line of a manufacturing line, or if I'm actually leading an entire department, how we decide to navigate an impact as a change agent is born in us. And that requires a level of confidence, a level of emotional intelligence, a level of skills and competencies that we hope to nurture within that workplace experience. So I'm looking for the developmental opportunities. I'm asking about further training. I'm asking about what my employees is willing to invest in. I'm asking to shadow individuals. I'm showing up in a way that of the capacity I want to be, whether I'm there or not, through a technical lens. So I think it's important to check, do we have the effective leader mindset? Because that's going to shape, how we show up. So we do have a responsibility first to ourselves. Do we believe we're in a capacity to lead others? And then if you assume a formal role of leadership in an organization, then you absolutely have a responsibility to show up in that capacity, but also in alignment with that organization's core values and what's important to reiterate as essential to fulfilling that purpose of a company. So I think that's how you begin to show up effectively. And the title has very little, if anything, to do with that.
Just your push for consistency is really impressive. Like that's what I'm hearing. Like, establish it, own it, continue to operate in it, but don't be afraid to adjust it. And I love all of that. We're going to go to the next slide. I think that next slide will take us where I want to go with this, right? Here, we're going to hold on to this because I have questions for you. But look, if you want to stay in contact with Dr. Dante Vaughn, he's on LinkedIn, trust me, but also I know the book's on Amazon, so people can go there. From Culture to Culture, am I correct? With the title?
Yep, From Culture to Culture, yep.
And then you got the Culture Works URL right there as well, so check in on the blog. All right, look, so, you know, man, I just love the work you're doing. So I stay connected and I try to research through. And you've been having a conversation about the Great Resignation myth. And I just love the way you position that and your reasoning behind that. Can we talk a little bit about that? Your thoughts on it?
Sure. I mean, that conversation was born out of just frustration in watching the marketplace respond to this perceived everyone's resigning and no one wants to work, and especially millennials and all this other nonsense. And I said, wait a minute, let me get back to data, statistics, insights to see where is this coming from, this perception that everyone's resigning. And when I started to look at the data, I said, wait a minute, it doesn't align with this perception that there's this labor shortage and all this other nonsense. So that's when I started to realize that the issue was less about whether individuals want to work. The issue is about their decision to want to work for these organizations. And I said in one of the speeches I made, it isn't that they don't want to work, they just don't want to work for you. When you have over 60% of the average household income is generated through passive means, outside of traditional wages, salaries, and what have you, 60% of their income, which means individuals have options. They can work, they can go do Uber, they can start a business, they can do things to generate income and even wealth. They could start a YouTube channel and earn income. So this premise that they don't want to work is nonsensical. It's about what makes you an employer of choice that makes an individual who has a chance to earn 60% of their income outside of your workplace, why would they want to come? And it comes down to what you and I talked about last week or so. I've always challenged a leader. Why do you think you pay an employee? Oh, I paid them to perform. I paid them to do the tasks they said they can do. And I said, you are completely wrong. If that's the case, the person who, if I have 2 hourly employees in the same position, relatively the same time with the same experience, I paid them about the same, if not the same. And it doesn't matter if one's underperforming or overperforming, I still have to pay them the same wage, because I'm paying not for their contribution to the business, I'm paying for their time. So as leaders, what are we doing to maximize what we can get out of employee during the time that they've committed to us, by way of fostering an experience that's motivating, inspiring, developmental? It comes down to what makes you an employer of choice. It's less about people not wanting to work. So that's what the premise of that conversation around this great resignation myth. It's not that people don't want to work. They just don't want to work for you.
I just love that conversation, man. I just think it's so on point. And I haven't heard anyone kind of speak to it from that standpoint. They were putting all the ownership on the other side, right? But
yes.
So all right. So before we get into Q&A, I want to go through one. I have to self-disclose to the audience. I'm a fan of Dr. Vaughn's work, so I have my own questions as well. I'm going to get to yours, so please continue to drop them in the Q&A, and I promise you we'll drop in there around 12:45. But I want to speak about the 5 methods to empower millennials and Gen Zers. I know you speak on that topic as well.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to narrow it down to 5 methods, I mean, first of all, be open to soliciting understanding, insight, perspective, because the reality is at any level and in any generation, there are insights we just don't have because we don't have those lived experiences. Oftentimes when I'm going into a multi-generational workforce, I encourage the organizational leaders or senior most leaders to create platforms where multi-generational workers can share, because there's insights from our legacy staff that the newer employees just don't have. They don't have that history. They don't have that experience, and vice versa. So being open to soliciting insights, perspectives, ideas becomes essential when bringing on millennial and Gen Z employees. We talked about mitigating personal biases around those groups. That becomes also essential, and sharing with those individuals. Hey, listen, I'm gonna tell you, I'm from the old school, and I don't have a ton of experience working side by side, and I'm excited about this experience. There's a lot of things I don't know, and I'm a little biased because I got some grandkids whose my experiences have been very different. So I'd love to learn from you. Imagine the power in that transparent conversation when you can say, hey, I got a little bias here. And I'm sure you may think that I don't know how to turn on a computer, right? So let's talk about it and then let's navigate what the reality is, because there's somewhere in between that is the real reality. So I would say solicit insights and objectives, be open and transparent about acknowledging biases up front and creating a safe space for that young person to say, hey, I got some biases about you too. Because listen, imagine my altering childhood experiences that have shaped how I see a man over 50 or a woman over 50, right? Imagine those experiences I've had when all I felt like I was in school was chastised by these elder people. And now I'm in a position where I don't know how to receive this person as a colleague. There's so many factors that we need to examine. So being open to that. I would say number 3 is creating space for innovation, right? We're in a time and a place where especially millennial and Gen Z and younger employees have grown up in the data age. Moore's law, the speed of change, especially on the tech side, is so fast. It's difficult to keep up without creating a space for research, development, innovation conversations, innovation hubs. Rather, it's just a committee you form and you ensure you have that diverse representation. That leads me to number 4. You have to find pathways for millennial or younger generations to have a seat at the tables where decisions are being made. It doesn't mean you have to make everyone a decision make or having decision-making authority, but influencing decision is a stepping stone to that. Oftentimes, baby boomer or Gen X leaders are like, they're wet behind the ears. I don't want them making decisions. That is troublesome because you are stifling the potential of your organization. Create spaces where they can be invited. I have clients who even invite individuals into their stakeholder meetings at points just to ensure that those perspectives or insights are shared. And I think number 5, I would share is pathways for purpose-driven growth, advancement. And when I say purpose-driven, meaning the things that motivate you, that could be an hourly employee at a fast quick serve restaurant who you find out took that job because all he wants to do is make enough money to buy a car and he's out of there. Imagine if you're trying to improve attendance rate, increase the number of hours this individual's working. When you say, yeah, you're trying to save up for that car you want. How much is the car? $5,000. All right, we're putting some kind of indicator on the wall, and we're going to cheer you on. And as you continue to adjust the approximate amount of money you're saving up towards your car every time you come in, and we're going to celebrate that with you. Sometimes we get hung up on what we as leaders want for our organization. We forget it ain't about that. Sometimes it's just about helping Bobby save $2,000 so he can get his hoopty so he can get up out of here. So let me celebrate that. So really getting down to what people's true motivators are, that's going to make a significant shift in an organization.
Yeah, no way. You took me right to this question we have in the Q&A. So basically the question is, it's been well documented that African Americans and Caribbean stay at tech companies for shorter periods of time because of cultural differences and lack of inclusion, and bias is also a huge factor. So the thing is, when will this change? And I just want to chime in here. I don't doubt that some of this is true at some level, right? But I do know that the tech industries in general, I don't know if people are leaving the industry as much as they're switching their direction in tech because they seem to acquire skills and that's like to use that skill set. So they stay, but they shift sometimes. And I think just the tech industry in general positions itself to cause you to shift because tech is ever evolving. I don't know if you have some thoughts on this question here.
Man, I mean, there's so many factors I believe that are influencing diversity in the tech space and the biases that are perpetuated, because we're dealing not just with Western bias. We have individuals who are leaders in the tech space from other areas of the globe, and they also have their own systemic biases that even expand beyond what we experience in Western society or even in the United States. So there's a challenge there. And those biases are not just external, they're also in our own communities and how we approach and examine those fields, because oftentimes they're not reinforced even in our own communities as a pathway for success for us. So then those few individuals who decide to take those tracks feel even more disproportionately represented in that field. But I will say that I believe in any scenario where you believe as an employee that you've been disproportionately marginalized in your role or in opportunities, we got to speak on it, right? Because otherwise, if we don't bring visibility to it, the biases and in some cases even racism will dominate And until someone speaks on it, then nothing really happens. I think in the tech space specifically, there have been movements around the BIPOC community and trying to bring awareness and education so that inclusion, access and inclusion becomes paramount to those in those fields, in those industries. So we got to start at all the way down to, public school system access and how we are reinforced. Think about systematically how limited young people, or especially among the BIPOC community, how limited they were in access to tech, even 20 years ago, right? So that has systematically fueled a lot of this disparity around, the level of understanding, knowledge, and ability of certain groups of, or certain communities in this tech space, further perpetuated by all of the biases that exist in terms of capability. So I think we have to start all the way at the grade school level and then become a voice in saying, hey, this is a thing and it's an issue and we gotta get in front of it.
Yeah, and it's a thing and an issue across a lot of industries. I'm not minimizing the challenges in tech, but I see someone that mentioned that Essence magazine did an article on determinations in tech. Please understand that not all of those terminations were tech people. Like I know people in HR and accounting and finance that lost their
Agreed,
jobs.
100%.
Facebook, they work for Twitter, they work for tech companies, but they weren't in tech roles. So, all right, next question. How do you hold leadership accountable? I have left so many positions and have a hard time conforming to the new norm of toxic workplace. I have tried to figure out how to fix myself.
Well, first of all, I don't think you need to conform to anything toxic. We have one life to live. No day is guaranteed to us. So how we spend that time matters every moment. So being in a toxic experience isn't something that I think is worth the investment. Now, with that being said, self-reflection goes all the way back to what I said earlier around recognizing your gifts and the power that you have as a leader, right? And really leaning in on that. And sometimes that requires us to also solicit some insights. I think one of the most transformative experiences I went through as an early executive, I did, I guess, what you would call the equivalency of a 360-degree kind of leadership review. And it solicited insights from everyone from inside that organization at the time to people in my personal life around how I show up as a leader. I intentionally included people in my personal life, some who are closer, some who are a bit more distant, but they're in my circle of influence, and the people in my organization, and then synthesize those findings. And it was very humbling because there was areas where I didn't realize I was having an impact. And there were areas where I thought were strengths, but actually were simply insecurities masked as overconfidence and other things. I think having that moment of self-reflection and solicitation of insight will start to give us some areas where we can start to explore and nurture further, more so in impact that we can have in the lives of others, but also in the areas that we want to continue to refine. And that becomes important also in the workplace, in the context of, even if your organization doesn't have a structure for performance feedback, doesn't stop you from establishing that it is important to you and finding opportunities to solicit from the individuals around you, again, to help shape your development. So you don't have to do it alone. And you definitely want to use a barometer because our own self-appraisals are typically either hypercritical or overconfident. And we typically kind of go up and down that spectrum. So getting others into that fold. I mean, I've had executive leaders who've shared their journeys, even with their spouses, and say, hey, I'm working on this, this, and this. What have you seen? I encourage them to get the insights from the people they love, who are going to tell you, especially the ones that'll tell you straight, right? So I think that's a nice way to start to nurture your own personal development as a leader, as you explore the culture that you want to thrive within. And it's okay to say that certain cultures I don't thrive within, and that's okay.
It's okay indeed. And speaking of okay, man, you were better than okay today. You were great. Thank you so very much for joining us. You have any closing remarks for the audience?
No, I just encourage everyone who's listening in to continue to lean into your purpose and continue to explore what that is. And the greatest way for you to really understand that is in the positive impact that you can have in the people, in the lives around you. And you'll start to recognize, well, what's the commonality in that impact? It starts to get you closer. And when you feel grounded and when you're at peace, even in the midst of adversity, then you know, okay, this is something, right? So I just encourage y'all to lean into that. Check me out on all of the links you see on the screen. You can just Google, you'll find me, or reach out to, Ken's organization. I just appreciate y'all and inviting me to speak. Please have me back. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about indeed. And we're going to do it again next week. You can stay connected with me also, though. LinkedIn, everybody knows I'm there. I'm there real heavy. And also, you can just visit the East Coast Executives website and connect with all things East Coast Executives. We're out here in the community doing some great things, workshops coming up, all of that good stuff. But let's just talk about what we're going to do on June 21st. It's networking at work. Learn to collaborate and keep your messages clear to the workplace. Our experts will share how. I know that Lydia Blanco's on the agenda. I believe Tiffany Dale Hunter's on the agenda, and I think we might have another special guest as well. So we really are loading up to just provide you with the best information that you can find in a virtual setting. So on behalf of the National Urban League, Wanda Jackson, Dory Brown, and the entire UL Jobs Network team, Shamaya, we met a new intern today, Kanjit, everybody that just chipped in and made this a special day. I'd like to thank you all. And to all of you that tuned in, great questions. Thanks for checking in and hanging out with us. I know I saw Erica Broadwater, president of NAAAHR on the feed, chiming in and sharing her organizational insight with us. Thank you so very much for just spending this time with us. My name is Kenneth L. Johnson. It's the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. We will see you again, networking at work, June 21st. You definitely don't want to miss that. Dr. Dante Vaughn, Philadelphia's own, hanging out in Atlanta now, producing books, man. Proud of the work that you do. You're necessary, my friend. Thank you.